Welcome back to DeAnn's Art Studio. I'm DeAnn Mealy. If you've been following me on social media lately, you've probably noticed that I have been painting quite a bit on, shall we say, non-traditional surfaces. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoy a frameable surface, a piece of art on canvas, on linen, on boards, but it's just kind of fun for me to take some of the techniques that we use in those traditional manners and adapt them over to the unexpected, like maybe a furniture piece or over on a door or the floor or fence post. Or you probably have noticed that I've been in the latest series of works I've been doing is I'm giving new life to old books. And one of those that you've probably seen on social media that I've posted on my Instagram and on Facebook, and this one's sold. Thank you. I'm really honored. It'll be going off to its new home sometime next week. But I find these at antique shops, estate sales, maybe online. You may find them at Marketplace. You can find them on eBay. You can find them pretty economical. And this one dates back to 1908. And as most of you know, I live in the historic district of my town and own a historic home. And my studio actually downtown is in a historic building as well. So these kinds of things kind of tug at my heartstrings. But this guy has definitely seen better days. And then, of course, better days are ahead. So what a neat way, I think, with spring, for Easter, Mother's Day is coming up. You can adapt some of your rose techniques, perhaps that you've been learning if you've been studying with me or some of my colleagues. You can adapt those over to a different type surface. So I thought I would share a painting with you on an old surface tonight or today, wherever you are in the world. And then I will give you a list of all of the paints, all of the supplies that I run through down at the bottom here on my YouTube channel. So I have this surface here. I have another green book, and it's pretty worn. If you need to, now this one had gold. Isn't that kind of pretty? I just noticed that. So I could take and do this and go back with some metallic gold. My plan is changing in my head right now. But if the binding is breaking or anything like that, feel free to go ahead and glue it. If your surface feels super slick, or you're worried that it's not going to be porous enough, you can use Global Art Heritage Multimedia, the all-purpose sealer. Just make sure you thin that down 20%. You don't want it to get too slick, okay? And that way, I use Heritage Multimedia acrylics exclusively, but those acrylics will have no problem sticking to your surface, okay? So let's get started. So I'm going to shift over. Let me take you to my down shot over to the book and get that. I'm using paper towels here to prop it up so you won't get much of a glare. I have paints out that have been out pretty much all day that I've used on a couple things today. And I'll tell you which colors I'm picking up as I pick them up. But I have everything kind of divided, warms and cools. And let me see if I can I'm using webcams on this video. But I have some warm colors. I do tend to divide. If you've painted with me, you know that I like to divide my palette into warms and cools. So I have all my warms on one side and my cool colors on the other. I've given myself a variety of reds, earth colors, yellows, some blues for reflective light, of course a healthy dose of white. And but we can talk about those as we paint. I'm going to be using Global Art Fusion brushes. They're a watercolor brush, so they're pretty soft. This guy's seen better days, but I use him to prep my canvases all the time, so I'll use this for background. That's a 3/4 inch, and I have a number 8 and a 10 flat here so that they're readily available. And now if you have any questions about the Heritage Multimedia acrylic product and the pigments or anything, you can email me at deannsartstudio@aol.com, and I'll put all that information down below so that you're able to reach me if you have any questions, okay? So let's get to painting. Now, if I'm looking at a surface like that, of course, compositionally, we have a lot of classes that we offer for that kind of thing. I'll be using these pure acrylic. I can pick up water, or I also have a little bit of extender. Let me reach over and show you what I have. I have a little salt cellar or a little candle dish or something, and I like old things, so this works well for me just to have a little extender close by. I'm looking at this book, and it may not look as warm to you on camera, but it is a pretty warm tone. And so I'm going to do some casual backgrounding, and I'm going to take this 3/4 inch brush and I'm going into some pine green, all right? And I'm just going to casually put some green down on my surface, all right? And this just kind of loosens me up, and make sure you have your paper towels so that you can pinch wipe often. I may rinse a little of that green out because I'm going to want to add a couple more colors maybe streaked in that background just to give it a casual look. I'm going to go into some yellow oxide and, just casually make some marks through there, and it's just going to be interesting, all right? And remember that interest is the key to a really pretty painting, so you want to keep it interesting, all right? Don't overblend, don't overwork it. We don't need to do all of that. Now, there are classes that we offer that will tell you everything you need to know and teach you the basics of painting a rose. So I'm just going to go through those, and if you need to pause this at any point in time, or you can watch the video through once. Just kind of familiarize yourself. You can pause me at any moment and catch up the second time through as you're painting, or just watch it or try to paint along, whatever. This is just going to be a real casual time, all right? This is supposed to be a fun painting for us. So I'm looking here, and I'm like, for composition, I tell my students all the time, I'm like, let's go in and let's establish some shapes where our flowers are going to be. So I'm going to just pick up a little bit. This is actually medium white, and you can also make that color. You don't necessarily have to purchase the extra pigment, but it's a convenience color for me. And I'm thinking that right around here, it might be kind of nice just to have a rose. She's going to be the queen, my queen rose, and I'm going to put my finger in and soften those edges. Now this book has quite a bit, it's pretty porous, it looks like. Everything's dragging, so you can feel free to pick up a little bit more liquid. I'm not getting my paint too thick underneath because remember, fat over lean, so I'm kind of keeping it, just to establish where I'm going to go, all right? And soften your edges. There are no guidelines, no boundaries, no stay in the lines. We didn't transfer a pattern or anything like that. Now, of course, compositionally, I think I may also want to establish maybe a smaller rose. Maybe it's not open quite as much, or similar to the one I did on the book that I already showed you that I did. And I thought I really liked that composition. I'm going to rinse out my brush, and I'm pinch wiping. Now, this acrylic, I'm using it pretty pure. I did thin that out with some water. I picked up a little bit. I didn't pick up any extender in that yet, okay? Now, I'm looking at this main rose here, and the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you establish the 3 circles of the rose, the throat. We have the bowl of the rose, and then the reaching petals. And so the coolest and also the darkest part of your rose is going to be in the throat, where all the small petals are, and then they start opening up. So I'm going to reach over on my palette, and I'm going to pick up, I think I'm going to choose to go into a little bit of quinacridone violet, and I really love brown madder. So I'm going to warm that quinacridone violet up just a little bit by brush mixing a little bit of brown madder into it. And I'm going to just stroke that, move the color around right there in the throat, okay? And if it looks a little bit too bright pink for you, the camera's really exaggerating that, making it look a very, very fuchsia. So you can warm that up a little bit more if you need to with a little bit more brown madder. We also need to establish the bowl. So I'm going to take and just give myself some shadow area and establish the bowl. So I'm going to have the bowl of my rose, which will be right in this area. Then I'll have the reaching petals, all right? And I'm going to rinse my brush out just a little bit, and I'm going to pinch wipe. Make sure you pinch wipe often, okay? Be real careful. I do this often. My rose will start kind of growing out a little bit, so you want to make sure you're working to maintain the shape inward. So I can come in with that warm white, and I just feel like I need a little more paint, and so I'm going to put a little bit more warm white. You can also come in and vary your color a little bit and start modeling color underneath your, before you start petaling. So I'm going to come in with some yellow oxide, and remember, interest, we want to add a lot of interest. All right, variation is the key to interest. So yellow oxide would give that some warmth underneath. I also need, whatever I do to the bowl of the rose, I need to make sure I also establish that down in the reaching petals in that portion of the rose as well. All right, pinch wipe, and I'm going to go back in. I don't want to start losing the bowl of my rose. Anytime you start losing the bowl of the rose, just go back in and reestablish it. All right, there's no limit to the amount of time that you can go back in and reestablish that shadow so that you can establish the bowl of your rose. Alrighty, now I have this this bud down here. I think this time I'm going to come in and kind of keep it consistent. I'm going to put some yellow oxide down, just kind of move it around so casually. And I'm using a number 10 flat, Fusion flat. So, you know, it's a watercolor brush. It's soft. It tends not to pick up the layers that are underneath, okay? I am going to go back in. I need to establish the throat of this. Even though it's a bud, it's still going to have a throat. So I'm going to reach over quinacridone violet and a little bit of that brown madder and just kind of walk myself in an area, establish casually, you know, that's where that throat, where the throat or the young petals would be. And this guy probably, my plan is that he won't really open up as much as the queen. And remember, you don't want to have competition with the queen. She'll get a little upset there. So we got to make sure we keep her more interesting. We have more variation in her, and that she really is the star of the show. So I have established my 3 parts to my rose: my throat, my bowl, and my reaching petals. And I've also gone ahead and established the underpainting, the modeling of color, if you will, for the bud that is really finishing out my composition, all right? My composition of the 2 flowers. At this juncture, you can go in, and it just depends. This is pine green, and my pine green's been sitting out and thickening up a lot. So I can come in and kind of negative paint in some greens underneath my flower, my rose. Yeah, the queen herself, she can get some green that will help give me some lost and found edges. I'll go under and move this green, the same green, and it is the same green that I laid down at first in my background just to kind of give me a casual start to everything. So this green can come in. You know, you have to look at your rose and see exactly what your rose needs. I'm going to come back in again, and I would like to model a little more of that yellow oxide, real casual, dancing my brush around. And notice where I'm holding my brush. I'm not choked up way, let me get it under the camera so you can see it. I'm not choked up there. I'm way back on my brush. That helps me keep it casual. I'm also going to establish the back side of this rose just a little bit with the color as I have it on my brush. And remember, when you first go into a flower, you first loaded your brush. You never reach to the back. You want to reach to your focal area, wherever that may be. Now, if the back of your rose is the focal area, I guess you've got me on that one, right? I'm going to establish a little more here on this bud so that I'm just kind of working them both at the same time. I feel like I need to go ahead and reestablish a little bit of the reaching petals, all right? So I've got some modeling. I've done it pretty simply for this one so far. Yellow oxide, we have some medium white under there. So, you know, you'll be able to see, you know, a variation of color, alrighty? But I still need some more variation. I really like to model quite a bit of color underneath, because when I start petaling it, it will come through and give us a variety. So I'm going to take some yellow oxide and model that in. I kind of pulled a petal over so you could see in with my yellow, Hansa yellow over into my yellow oxide. Now Hansa is a really pretty yellow. It's a pure pigment in the line. So it will give some pop to that rose wherever you put it. And I wanted to start bringing the front of that rose up. So I pop that yellow in toward the front first on the bud. I'm going to kind of follow through with the same technique. I may and I may tone that yellow down on that bud and close it up. What you don't want is really to have two different size of roses off the same bush compositionally. If you have roses that are the same color, the viewer is going to think that those are, coming off of the same bush, so they're going to kind of need to be similar in size, or you got to make sure they're generationally different, meaning that one is a bud, maybe it's not opened as much, and then you'd have the queen or the more opened flowers. So kind of keep that in mind. We all tend to make those mistakes when we're first starting out, and we also make them later on, right? Now, as this is pure acrylic, but it's very, very wet. I don't know if you can kind of see the thickness of my paint. See how wet that is? I'm going to let that sit and start tacking up. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to go in to some of this pine green again, and I'm going to cool it off a little bit with some phthalo green blue. It's a really beautiful color. It's hard to see on the palette, but when I come over here, it's going to really cool my green off and give me some cooler greens. Can you see that? It also is a darker color, darker hue. So I can shadow that in to where I think my cools may be. Remember, it's always easier to cool a warm than it is to warm a cool, but it's not that it cannot be done. So if you just want to streak some colors in for interest, you can do that too. If you use a color, create a color, use it, you got to move it. So make sure you don't isolate your color. It's a nice time just to kind of casually stroke some of that in, some of that mix in. I'm just kind of brush mixed in and moving it around. Now, if you got to remember that I have the reds in the center. Okay, remember that is a red, quinacridone violet mixed with brown madder, and red and green are opposites on the color wheel. So anytime that you mix the colors together that are opposite on the color wheel, they're going to gray each other or kind of create a yuck. So if you're going to go back into your reds and you just had green in your brush, it's a good time not just to pinch wipe, go ahead and rinse, okay? That way you'll be able, the result will be a little better for you. You won't go yuck, and you won't be emailing me going, what did I do? I used the colors that you mentioned. Sorry, just make sure you rinse your brush when you're using opposites on the color wheel, unless a toned color is what you're looking for, all right? Now, this has been sitting up just a little bit. My white that I use is extremely thick. It's been sitting out all day. I'm not going to go straight white on this. I'm going to pull some white over into that last yellow that I used and kind of model it up on my brush, okay? So I modeled it. I have a little bit of yellow. I don't know if you can you see that? And then I have a little bit of white, and I like to just kind of shovel up a little bead onto the tip of my brush. I'm going to come over to my rose, and I'm going to start thinking about, well, maybe some strikes of color so that I can come in and start creating the first petals on this rose. And I'm going to push and pull. Remember, this paint stays wet, even though it's a pure acrylic. It stays wet for a very long time. It has a nice open time. It won't dry out on you, especially if using a lot of thick paint. It won't dry out on you as quick as other brands will, okay? Because this has no filler. It is a pure pigment, and it's just a wonderful product. I'm going to slice in, and since I have what I consider a dirty brush, I'm going to go ahead and casually put in some of that yellow toward the back of my rose. Now, it is a good time whenever you need to. You can come in. Remember, we talked about this. You can reestablish. If you need to reestablish color in the throat, you can do that. All right, I'm picking up a little of my yellow there. And if you need to reestablish your bowl, you may do that now. Also, if you lose your bowl, reestablish it, okay? And that way you can maintain the structure of your rose. It's very difficult to start seeing a rose, but the more and more you paint them, the easier it will be for you to see them. And the more practice you have, the easier it's going to be to paint them as well, of course, okay? So now I'm going to come back in, and I'm looking at this rose, and I'm like, all right, so I think I can start really establishing the front of it. I would like to go back into my yellow, my Hansa yellow, and start brightening it just a little bit. It looks a lot brighter on camera than it does under the lights here. So I want to also work on the structure of that rose a little bit. I'm just moving and modeling color. I'm looking at my rose saying, what does she need? What is it that she needs so that, I can strike my movement of color in. And I'm not really working on petals yet. I'm just kind of striking color where I need color at, okay, and keeping my color modeled. Alrighty. Whatever you do to the one, you may want to go ahead and carry that color down. We're just given the impression of a bud, a bud that's just barely starting to open up, down below. You don't want to give this more interest than you would give the queen herself, so be very aware of that, all right? Now, you can pinch wipe often. You can see that I'm super casual because I'm painting way back on my brush, and I'm being very aware of keeping everything very, very casual. Reaching petals, you can start establishing the first of those if you'd like. And if your paint's sticky, I would go ahead and you can pick up just a little bit of extender, and that'll keep that paint moving for you. Brush mixing it. I'm going to establish some of these reaching petals over to the side so it starts keeping the shape of the rose. And remember that these petals are up under that rose. They don't all just kind of angle right towards the growth point that you would envision at this point here. The growth point is actually up under the rose, alrighty? So now I'm going to go ahead and let me strike in a little bit more just to give myself some guidelines on where her shape is. Make sure I'm keeping her shape. I'm starting to kind of give myself, where the petals will be, the reaching petals, starting to get the shape of the rose. When I have paint in my brush, I like to have some of this mottled color. It's a good time for me. Like I said, I can go and reach back to the back of the rose, deposit a little bit of that color, but I'm not depositing it right after I first loaded the brush. Then I'm going to come down here and move the colors, same colors, around because I don't want there to be any discord there. All right. Now, while that's starting to set up just a little bit, I could take and come in with some of my pine green and a little yellow and start establishing just a little greenery. I'm not really thinking leaves yet. I'm just kind of thinking some greens. You'll have to excuse the train. I do live right downtown, and we're right on a historic railroad that still runs, and the trains go through at all hours of the night. And after you live here, you don't really hear them as much as you do when you first come here. Everybody can hear the trains, and I'm like, oh yeah, when I'm recording, there's a train. So, so I'm moving this color, just this green around just a little bit. Alrighty. So laying some foundations in for some of my finishing touches. And I am moving kind of quick. The quicker you move, the better your roses turn out. If you sit there and belabor them and belabor them and belabor them, they're not going to appear to be as casual. And sometimes the fastest roses that we paint, we push through it and we don't play with it. We just kind of strike our color in and move on. What I'm doing right now is moving color, and I'm thinking in my head that it'd be nice as I start finishing this up, if this color is moving, the yellow, and it starts looking like there are other flowers, you want to, you're going to rely heavily on optical blending. And also, if somebody sees, if your viewer is looking at a rose and then they're looking at more impressions, light, just movement of color, their eye is going to see a rose. Why is that? That's because you've already told them that this is a composition about beautiful spring flowers, okay? So they don't have to be all finished roses, just some beautiful impressions of some spring flowers, alrighty? So let's move on. Now I'm ready to really start working to finish this rose, and I got green all in my yellow there, awesome. So I'm going to move some down so you can see it, all right? And I just don't want green right in the front of my bowl. No big deal. But yeah, it just might not be the look that we're looking for right now. Now, I'm going to come into the front of this rose, and I'm going to start pushing and depositing some of my lights so I can have some of my petals, the impression of petals. And it's just a movement. I'm kind of looking, saying, okay, what does my rose need? All right. What do I need to start giving it some lights? And if I get too much of the white, I can always go back in and just move my color by going back into my yellow. You can go back into your yellow oxide or even yellow oxide plus Hansa. It's kind of one of those, what does your rose need at this point? If you start to lose the bowl of your rose, if you lose the bowl of your rose, don't forget, it's up to you to go back in there and reestablish it. So reestablish your bowl. Don't lose your bowl, all right? If you start to lose that shadow, make sure you go back into it and reestablish it, all righty? And I did that by kind of just taking that yellow that was on my brush and putting it over into the reds that I had for the shadows, which remember that was quinacridone violet and a little bit of brown madder. Alrighty. Now I'm looking at this, and I think I can go ahead and even dare to go ahead and start pulling maybe some of my really big lights up at the front. Looks like it needs to tack up. There's a fine line between that perfect tack when it just goes really well and when it's still just a little bit too wet. Excuse me, sorry about that. Now, I'm going to take and I need to work on my reaching petals, and it's not a problem if you feel like you want to turn your piece around in order to paint, you can. You can turn it around and let me get a sip of water. Sorry about that. I guess I'm talking a lot. And in the interest of full disclosure, I actually got a sip of coffee. So if I start talking faster, you'll know why. All right? Anyway, so let's go down to the reaching petals. And I want to establish, now I don't necessarily want that same layer lightened. I want to establish maybe another layer of reaching petals. And you can always, if you need to, you can put just a little extender into your brush there, and that might make that flow just a little better. I'm starting to get a good stickiness. I like when I get that sticky feel. I'm trying to work just a little of that paint off and come over and pull some more reaching petals, all right? Now, you can do that. I understand when you're first starting the feel that you want to turn that upside down. You don't have to turn it upside down. It's really nice. It gives you a lot of variation if you work hard to start painting it with it right side up. So if I do that without turning it, I could come in and just get a few petals, the impression of petals. See how that just falls off the brush, and then it won't be as stiff, okay? So that's going to be up to you. That'll give you something to strive for. Goals, right? As you get more comfortable with it. And it will come. The more you practice, the better it will get, the easier you will find them. Now I'm hitting a really nice stickiness, okay? I wish you could just see that stickiness and feel it for yourself. You'd really enjoy it, I promise. Now, since that's starting to get sticky for me, I'm going to go into some really thick white, all right? Pick up some really thick white, and I'm going to place that over in the highlight area, the front bowl of my rose, and tickle it around. Alrighty. And take my finger. My finger does a lot of work on these. I end up with paint all on my fingers. You can always tell, your rose is right there on your finger, D. I'm going to come in just with a little bit of dirty brush and a little bit of that white. If it gets out, that's okay. We don't need to worry about, being perfect, alrighty? Perfect. There's not really a perfect rose. The impression that you capture for your viewer and leave them something to imagine, it just makes it very nice. It makes it interesting, alrighty? And if you want, you can come in. Now I have some white happening. I will come in and maybe tip just a little bit on that rose, but I'm starting to like what I've got there. Now her throat, the throat part looks like a hole when you're looking at the TV screen. So I'm not going to go straight in there. It's drying up a little bit on me. It's been pretty dry here. It's not that it's cured, but it's starting to dry to touch. So I might restate it, the center, just a little bit. While I'm doing that, I feel pretty comfortable that I can come in and restate some of my darks just to move that color so it's not discorded. And I'm also going to restate that color down on this bud while I've got it. Alrighty. Now, while that color up in the center is restated, I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush. Sorry for that racket right there in your ear. By the microphone is where I stuck the water pail, so that wasn't real bright there, was it? But I'm going to come in now, and I've put some of that yellow color back on my brush. And remember, it's wet, so when you strike in and tickle, you're actually picking up some of the color that's under that. Now, I kind of like that. If you want, you can stick your big finger in there, or if you have a small finger. Mine always tends to be bigger and do more. Sometimes it's leave well enough alone for me. If you lose everything, you can come back in and restate again, which always working back and forth kind of gives you a lot of interest, alrighty? And I can see on camera that it's looking just a little bit like a line, so it's going to, since it's very wet right now, I can come in and add just a little more yellow. That's kind of pretty, yeah. All right, so I'm going to move down to the bud again. Now the bud should not have as much interest as the queen. So I'm going to just real casual come in and move some color. Our colors were the yellows, alrighty, but it's okay if it has a little bit more of a pink tone to it as well, which might be kind of pretty. I'm doing one little side kind of started opening up and reaching over toward the queen. You want to make sure that when you're doing a formal composition that they touch, so that just makes it just a little more pleasing to the eye. Let's see, I might want to pull up just a little more. I got it a little yellow right there, and casually moving my color around. Notice it's moving. I'm real casual about it. Some of this light might need to drop down. Some of it may not need to. Alrighty. If you feel like you want to hold it up and kind of get an idea, this is very extended a little far for me right there. So I could just turn it over and reestablish the queen's petal right there, and smear it. Take it out, casual. All right, shear it, and I just hit the microphone with the paint. I hope y'all enjoyed that. I sheared it all the way over and off of the book. Shearing it, you take and you have your paint, you place it, and then you can shear it, and it gives you a beautiful look with these acrylics, all right? And it's a lost and found, almost like it's a transparency right there. You can come in and re-edge just that edge where you got the transparency, re-edge it just a little bit, and that'll add just a little more color to it. I think that's kind of pretty. I like that. Now, for this bud, I don't want to overwork the bud. You can experiment, on yours. It looks like mine can handle a little bit of light right there, but I don't want to overdo it. Alrighty, so I want the impression of the bud, but I don't want to overdo it. I want her to be super casual. Alrighty, now I'm looking at this and I'm like, all right, I think we're ready to start working on the green and finishing it up. So we don't want to make a career out of it. It's just a book that we're giving some life to. So I'm going to come down into my pine green again, and I'm going to pick up, I also have dioxazine purple. Dioxazine, of course, is very cool. It's also a dark color. And as opposed to using, going black into my green, I always find that that's really pretty. Of course, it's going to cool it off. But the contrast in negative painting right under my queen, you see how that just makes her start to pop. Alrighty? Now, you don't want to do that same contrast everywhere. You don't want to have that same contrast really, with the same exact color occurring down under your bud. So you want to kind of save that for your queen. I'm still not super thrilled with the way this is going right through here. So I think what I'm going to do is establish some green and shear it just a little bit there. See, I put the green in and then sheared it off a little bit. And that, I like that much better. That's starting, and I'm going to shear some green into my rose, and that just keeps those edges a little more casual. I might take some of that darker color. I kind of got a middle value right there. Let me see if you can see that a little better if I tilt it up. Does that help? Yeah, there we go. And I got a little bit of that middle value. Now, some of these darks, I'm not standing up over my piece, so I can... I won't be able to tell easily how far out those darks need to go. I can start using them to establish some of the leaves that's working around. I will lighten a little bit. And remember, your leaves now are not the stars of the show at all. All right, I got to tilt that up. I got a little glare. Do you see that? So I'm establishing leaves. Don't leave a halo around your rose, okay? It's okay if you pull the leaf that you're working on into your petals that you've already done. I know we worked so hard on them, but we did it once, and what we can do it again. But what makes that so nice is if you avoid the area, then it's going to be super obvious. So, and that happens when you're even doing landscapes. If you avoid an area and you don't go with your sky through your trees, you'll see right where somebody stops and starts again. That sky is through there. This green leaf is up under my rose, so I'm going to paint it into my rose and reestablish that petal line if I still need it. So it'll just add more interest and to make you look like you know what you're doing, alrighty? So I'm going to come in and I'm going to add this Hansa yellow into pine green. Just makes a really, really pretty yellow, warm green, a yellow green. You can, then you can go back and lighten it if you'd like. You can go back and lighten it. I'm tilting up so I can see it. I've got quite the glare going up on high on that book. I'm going to lighten this color with some white. Now, it looks like I got a little too much, got a little white happy right there. And so all I do is pick up a little bit more of the pine, a little bit more Hansa, model it onto my brush, and then I'm going to come in and pull some highlight. Okay. See that yellow? Oh yeah, nice. That pulls that yellow. You know, it kind of ties the yellow together that you have on the rose. It starts tying it into your leaves, and you don't want to have a huge discord of color, a huge discord of what you're doing. Alrighty, I'm going to come in and just kind of with this color move it around. Now, if you're not super happy with that being right out of the throat of your rose, whoops. There's no whoops. There's happies. You can just kind of soften and shear it off. Alrighty. Need to move the color a little bit. Now, it won't be quite as bright and light as you move away from your focal area, but you still got to make sure you give the impression of that color and move that color. Okay. And you can start kind of establishing, you know, looking at it. What does this need to start finishing it up? Remember, it's supposed to be just a pretty quick rose on books, and we've been at it for I've talked quite a bit, so we'll call 37 minutes, we'll call it 30 minutes so far, but we don't want to make a career out of it, right? So I have my rose, I have my bud. It looks like now that I'm looking at it that my bud might be able to handle just a little bit more structure. She's kind of feeling left out, so I'm going to pick up just a little extender, a little white, like a dirty white, and strike over her just to give her a little bit more interest. Okay. And it looks like I need to maybe consider reestablishing the shadow of what would have been a bowl if she was dropping her petals down. I'm not going to go completely into quinacridone. It's all the way over here. You couldn't see it. Sorry about that. Quinacridone violet. I'm going to pick up a little bit of my yellows into that since I'm up here on the warm side. I just don't want them to be quite as aggressive in hue, intensity contrast as I have on my queen. Now that might be a tad too warm, so I can always cool it. Remember, it's easier to cool a warm than it is to warm a cool. So you can go back in as many times as you need to. All right, and that looks like a lot of contrast on camera, but you know, remember that the hues, the values, the acrylics will dry down to values, so you also have to keep that in mind when you're working with it, so that you don't end up with something way darker than what you thought. So you know, it's okay to come back to it as everything starts drying, to look to see if you might need to reestablish something, okay, or restate something. That's not a big deal. We all do it. You know, you walk away from it, you come back, you might say, oh yeah, I see that. I see exactly what she's talking about. It looks a lot different after it dried. That's just the nature of acrylics. It's not a big deal. Now, I do see something. I want to soften my line right here. So I'm just looking for places where I can, you know, distract from your eye, so your eye isn't going straight to an area. Usually that is where lights or brights contrast with darks or dulls, okay? And of course, I told you that we need to make sure that they touch. So I'm going to reestablish the queen's reaching petal right there. So she's almost touching. And I might be able to come back in and make it even a little bit lighter. Okay. And not shear it all the way. I tend to get a little crazy with my shearing. And then I'm like, oh, you got to reestablish it again and reestablish it again. And maybe one or two more times. So, but it's really neat that you can take acrylics and do that. Now, you can turn it around if you need to, if that helps you, remember. So let me show you. And you can establish your petals, and just make sure you work towards not having to turn your piece around, alrighty? Because it does add interest, and then everything won't be exactly the same. If you turn it over all the time, everything's going to kind of go perfect and always look the same. Now, I'm starting to look at finishing her up. I need to move some color around. I see that my red, which is my quinacridone violet, is a little isolated. I want to make sure I don't get it too intense, so I can bring over some quinacridone and dull it with a little bit of pine green, because remember, reds and greens are opposite on the color wheel. And I can even lighten it to a pinky color. And I feel kind of comfortable that this is probably going to help my composition by moving a little bit. Now, if that looks a little too intense, alrighty, because that pink doesn't really occur anywhere else, I might take it and bring it down on the bud. And then I will also reach over and pull that color into the queen a little bit. Okay, so it's not isolated. Okay, kind of like that. It's my technique. And then you can go back and you can get some of that darker pink if you'd like, and just kind of, dance it around. It starts moving your colors, alrighty? And then I see one more thing. When I look up on the camera, I still feel like, and I think it's just the camera is really exaggerating that contrast of hue, intensity, and value right there. So I'm going to soften it with just the corner of my brush. Try to soften that out just a little bit with a little bit of that light yellow. And then you want to kind of move back from it, alrighty? And if you see anything that looks like you have a little too much of it, it's wonderful with these paints. Just reach over and you can just push it back a little bit. And it looks like you planned it that way, all right? Because some of those pushes and shoves and layering paints, they give a lot of interest to your painting, alrighty? So this is starting to work for me. I may want to, you can look at it. I might look at this as it dries up, and I'm not right under camera, but I would definitely put a picture of the final up there. You'll see it. I may want to pull something that gives you, registers leaf a little bit more to the viewer down at the bottom, just so we have, because I'm in a very casual mood today, I see. So, but I love it. And every time you come back to paint a rose, or every time you sit down, your brush is going to have a little different calligraphy. It's just how we are. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful not to paint the exact same thing, the exact same way the next day. I just love that. It's exciting for me to come and see exactly like what's it going to look like today. What's your calligraphy going to be? Alrighty. And now you can come in this. I feel like we could use, there's some contrast right here that's not really occurring in my greens anywhere else. And remember, that was pine green, a little dioxazine, kind of modeled into my brush. So I could probably, move some of that contrast just a little. All right, let me get it on camera so it's not that big of a secret anymore, right? I feel like some of this, could get the appearance that those are the stems for the flowers. You don't know. We're not going to spell it out for our viewers. It might be kind of nice if just a little of this green just dances and I shear it off, okay? So, you kind of, I step back. Even though it's a book, I will still step back from the piece and see, what does that look like at a distance, alrighty? So we've been at it for, of course, I talked a lot. We've been at this for 45 minutes. Not too bad, not too bad. I'm kind of pleased. There's a couple things that I might, go back and add to it and just refine it when I step back from it. And like I said, as it starts to dry, there might be a couple things that you see that you're like, oh, I'd like to add that to it. I do like to come back. One thing people, students always tell me, oh, I just love your background. I don't know where that came from. I'm going to load up some yellow oxide because yellow is kind of, in the flowers, and I might just take some of that and just scribble in. Now, if it grabs a little too much, I can always shear it just a little bit. You can add some extender or some water to it if you want. If you feel like, no guts, no glory. I'm picking up fuzz here. No guts, no glory. If you feel like, oh, it could probably handle a little more, then do it. It's yours, alrighty? I just like to kind of pull something down into that corner, and I typically will do that up, at the top. Excuse me. That gives you the impression of that yellow again, like you've got yellow flowers. And then you can also, if you're moving yellow, just make sure it doesn't start looking like it's a sunburst. Now that right there, if that bothers you a little bit, you can come in and maybe move some of that pink into it, okay? Because see, now that made it really start looking like it could be another flower happening, alrighty? So I hope you've enjoyed this. Just a quick demonstration. Well, not super quick, 45 minutes, but it was kind of fun. Books are out there. Try different backgrounds. The books come in all different colors. As you can see, I have this was a burgundy one. Let me switch the camera back for you so you can see that. This was burgundies, and I did some pinks on that one, all right? And, you can vary your roses a little bit. Let me slide over here and show you the black one. This is the black. I changed this a couple times, just kind of fooling around with the different violets, warms, and cools. And I want you to look let's see if I could get it up there so you can see how thick the paint is. Are you able to see that? There we go. See, I have that paint, you can feel the texture, all right? There's no problem with being able to feel texture of the paint on a book when you're painting it as well. And of course, you guys know, most of my students, and if you painted with me before, you know that I love red. So here's the same green book. There were like 4 of these at the antique shop that I got these from a few weeks ago before we all the businesses closed for a little while. And anyway, I just thought that was really pretty. So this one will probably be something I'm going to need to keep because I'm really, really, really fond of red. You know how I love my red, right? So I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, message me on social media. I will put this one up so you can see the final. I may soften that center or something a little bit after it dries and I see exactly what we have. It's pretty fun. I really enjoy it. And it's only paint, and the book, it's an old book. They're great for practice surfaces, and then you end up with a little masterpiece or a little something that, you can use. Here it is at a distance. You can use for a gift for mom for Mother's Day, okay? And I do see, let me shift over. I do see that that center still is pretty intense. It still wants to grab. I really would love to soften that just a little bit. So, it's one of those where you go, okay, Dee, step away from it don't keep going. But I just feel like I want just a little more softness into that center. There we go. And that was just like one little kiss of the brush. Isn't that funny? And I did drop down to a number 8 so that I could get kind of tight, into there. So if you have any questions, like I said, please feel free to email me. I'll see you on Facebook and my Instagram. Please follow DeAnn's Art Studio on Facebook, and it's DeAnn's Art Studio and Gallery on my Instagram, where I have my business. I will be launching some classes, online classes, very soon. We are really working on that, and we're going to focus on hues, how to paint in different hues, handling reds, and then we'll do a series on yellows and violets and whites, painting different wildflowers, roses, and those kinds of things. So I hope you'll enjoy. I hope you'll join me, and I hope you've really enjoyed this piece. So have a great night, and painting's good for the soul. So I think it's a good idea for all of us just to take some time and paint some beautiful spring flowers on some beautiful surfaces while we have a lot of time on our hands. All right, everybody stay safe, and I'll see you next time right here on my YouTube channel or in one of my online classes. Thank you.